Right, where were we?
Cover to cover.
Yeah. Okay, so the next album is Cover to Cover, which is a compilation put together by Edinburgh-based artist Fiona Liddell. So Fiona Liddell first came to our attention when she featured on the Jack Hinks song Jigsaw. We reviewed that back on episode 13. On that song, she provided gorgeous backing vocals and played some really striking violin parts. So Fiona performs her own music as Fiona Liddell. She regularly collaborates with other artists. She's part of the Scottish electric duo Geist. No idea how you pronounce that either. She also does her bit to promote other artists with her Local Heroes playlist and her Shout Out Saturdays videos, where she gives a shout out to some fantastic new music and artists. So this album was conceived to highlight and combat the underrepresentation of women in music, and it was inspired by the gender imbalance in Spotify's largest Scottish music playlist. So Cover to Cover then is an all-female compilation of Scottish musicians performing cover versions of each other's songs. All proceeds from the album are being donated to Scottish Women Inventing Music, which is a charity committed to achieving a level playing field for women and pushing for gender equality across the music industry. So the album to date has raised well over £500 for that cause. So that's pretty good going. You can purchase it on Bandcamp, and obviously all the proceeds go to charity. There's also, which is handy if you want to kind of compare the tracks when you're listening along, there's a cover to cover playlist on Spotify, which is all the original versions of each song, so you can kind of jump back. Or what I did was I jumped back and forth between Bandcamp and Spotify and compared the tracks together. So, and the way the track listing works is that each track on the album is a cover of the succeeding artist. So the first track is from Geist, it's Lipstick Queen, which is a cover of an artist called Jen Ella, and it is then followed by Jen Ella covering the next artist, and so on and so forth. So Lipstick Queen, I really like. It's got this like woozy, dreary electronic warble. It's Fiona's vocals on there are really gloomy and deep, and they just kind of cut through the darkness. It feels a bit like a soundtrack to like a late 90s or early 90s movie. Like sounds like it could come off the soundtrack for The Beach or something like that. It's when you compare it to the original, it adds a bit more drama to what is just an acoustic song with Queen guitars, and that's really good in its own right. So straight from the first track on here, I'm kind of really impressed. So what about your thoughts, Grant?
Yeah, I think it's a really cool album, and I would agree with you there. The first track immediately caught my attention. It's interesting that you say that it reminded you from, say, a movie from, or the soundtrack from a movie from like the 90s, like The Beach. For me, it reminded me of something you might have heard on the soundtrack to the 2016 Nicholas Winding Refn movie, The Neon Demon.
All right.
So yeah, it was right up my street, and similar to yourself, really enjoyed the juxtaposition between Fiona Liddell's luscious, almost ethereal vocals with those rising electronic soundscapes, particularly during that bridge at around the kind of 2-minute mark. It just feels as if it kind of builds in intensity until it almost fills the room. I just thought it was epic. I haven't listened to the original, so I couldn't tell you how it compares. But yeah, instantly fell in love with this song.
So the original has got like the same melodies, like the melody that's in sort of electronic melody that runs throughout Geist's version. That version's played on guitar. I think it's an acoustic guitar or like a really maybe a clean electric guitar, but it's not played loudly at all, and it is really good. Perhaps prefer the Geist version, but I mean, if you look at track 2, which is actually by Jen Ella, it's her playing a cover of the song Insomnia by Saria Wu, and she plays that in the style of the way she plays Lipstick Queen, if that makes sense. So it's quite a dreamy acoustic number. So if you imagine that song, that is how she kind of sings the style of Lipstick Queen, are quite similar. So, and I mean, it's quite a good song. It's quite somber. Jane Ella's vocals are really strong, and I like that there's a little bit of an Irish twang in there. She's from Cork,
Yeah.
and it's not, it's not really heavy, but you can just hear a little bit of that twinge in there, which is nice to hear. It's pretty stripped back. It's bare bones. It's emotional. When you compare that to the original has a more kind of spidery guitar arrangement, more stylized vocals. It's a lot folkier and more mysterious, and it almost sounds like it is performed like in a dark forest. There's actually like the hooting of owls and stuff, so it's worth listening to that original version, because it's very cool, very, very different.
Okay, I'll check that out, man.
But again, you can kind of get an idea of what that might sound like from the next track.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really quite a clever way of like ordering the songs, because it lets you hear an artist but on somebody else's song. It's strange, but I think it works quite well. So Fine Wine is a good example of the kind of Saria Wu sound on her own song Insomnia, but it's like it's got soft, kind of slightly grainy vocals, but they're really good, and there's like plodding keys and shuffling drums, but it's quite slow, but it's atmospheric, and it sort of draws you into its world, which again is a contrast with the artist they're covering, who is a more folky kind of country artist.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Fine Wine. I've kind of described it here as being possibly one of my favourite tracks on the album.
It's very
I really enjoyed it, and I would agree that the kind of vocals do sound quite grainy. I've described them, there is a timbre to her voice. However, she kind of mostly sings, I would say.
Yeah.
Which I really liked. I'm all about spoken word at the moment, and that's what I enjoyed at the second track. When Jen Ella was covering Saria's song, I quite enjoyed that juxtaposition between the kind of spoken word, and then when she goes on to sing, I really quite enjoyed that. As for kind of Fine Wine, I would agree. I really liked the kind of slow, shuffling, minimalistic kind of feel to it. It was kind of low-key drum beat with almost kind of muted, atonal, underwatery sounding electronic flanges and pulses, which, yeah, was right up my street, man.
Yeah. There seems to be a bit of sort of, the album kind of jumps back and forth between these kind of
those types of tracks,
songs, and more acoustic kind of singer-songwriter styles, doesn't it?
It does. I would agree with you there, because although kind of track number 5, Get Over Yourself, which is Amy Huckstep track covered by Sieti, who's a Glasgow-based singer and songwriter. I've described it sounding as almost like an epic glam rock piece, straight from the kind of 1980s. There's certainly a number of guitar solos in there that could have been lifted straight from that era anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Felt like a ballad, like a proper rock ballad, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. It's a really good track, actually. The one before it, where it's one of these acoustic songs, the song they're actually covering is like, she's singing in an acoustic way, but the original is almost like a really bombastic, like surging behemoth of a song, and it's like the vocal style is like, it's like an artist like Pink or something like that. It's that kind of song, but she's done a stripped back acoustic version of it. So it's even, it's like the songs, they jump between sort of electronic sort of ones and acoustic ones, but the songs that are being covered, the way they're being covered also jumps around that way as well. There's not somebody covering an acoustic song as an acoustic song. It's usually taking something very different from their own style and transforming it.
So I take it track number 6, Yellow Teeth, is like the original is very different then, because I liked Yellow Teeth. I liked what kind of Amy Huckstep did with it. Again, one of my favourite tracks on the album. I really liked the kind of fragility of her vocals coupled with the acoustic guitar. For me, going back to what we were saying about the first track there, about it coming or sounding as if it came from a soundtrack, I felt as if this sounded like something from like an indie flick, like an indie kind of rom-com.
Okay, yeah. The original version it sounds like I've written a vintage live performance. It almost feels like it's performed in front of an audience, and there's a little bit of warble to some of the sounds, and the piano sounds kind of far away behind the vocals, and it feels deliberately from the past in a way. Okay. It's quite a cool song as well, the original version. But yeah, they're like all of these songs are so different from the originals. I think it's a bit like the kind of Jamie Lenman shuffle effect. Like we talked about when we reviewed that, we talked about Weezer, who did a kind of straight up covers of like classic rock songs and stuff like that, or like popular songs, and they just did straight up covers of it. Whereas Jamie he took songs and he reinterpreted them, and that's what this does. Mm. It's a lot more interesting than perhaps your standard somebody singing Wonderwall, or just covering Wonderwall or something like that. You know what I mean?
Just a straightforward cover.
Yeah. So there's a lot of cool stuff on here. The Mima Moreau covers Post-Cold Prom Queen. That I think is actually a live performance. I think it says that on the track. And it's just her high-pitched vocals over this gloomy organ dreamscape. And it's, the vocals are really catchy. And then the Post-Cold Prom Queen version is just a more gothic version, but with a much more of a stomp through it. But the cover captures the tone quite well. Whilst it's different in the way it's performed, it's similar in tone. So it kind of captures the essence of the song, I suppose, without sounding too pretentious.
Yeah. And then that's immediately followed up by track 8, which is the Chiara Bailey cover by Post-Cold Prom Queen, who are another Scottish electronic duo. I love this track as well, man. And the electronic sounding, the alt pop tracks really kind of stood out for me. I've described this as being an absolute banger of a song. It opens with some kind of animal, almost jungle type sound effects before it catapults into a lush and luxurious kind of 80s synth pop banger with some really infectious kind of flourishes of almost kind of 8-bit noises.
Yeah, definitely.
Which I loved.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I've got nothing more to say about it other than what you've said, man. You've covered it. But again, the original is just an acoustic, sort of quite an achingly beautiful acoustic song with this like brooding piano. So they've turned it into this mad, like you said, 80s synth pop banger.
Aye, yeah. I mean, I suppose this album's it's done what it's set out to do. It's about kind of bringing attention to Scottish female artists, and off the back of listening to this album, I've then went on to follow the likes of Pinlight, Post-Cold Prom Queen. I've gone on to follow quite a lot of the artists that are featured on this album, and I perhaps wouldn't have heard of them otherwise.
Aye, like I mean, most of these bands I haven't heard of.
No,
I haven't heard of before. Well, it was just Geist and Fiona Liddell, really. It's her kind of project, but it is a good way of discovering artists and what they do well and that kind of thing. Yeah, I just like how varied it is, and I think I probably prefer the more electronic heavy songs generally.
I would agree with you. However, I have to mention Minotaur, the Aurora Engine cover by Francesca Ortisi. It was a track that really grew on me. I wasn't too sure what to really make of it at first. However, I would say that Francesca's vocals on it are phenomenal. I mean, they're really kind of it's a standout piece. She effectively singing along to what is effectively a pretty basic kind of backing track. I've described it as having a real R&B kind of feel to it. However, I don't know necessarily agree with that now in hindsight. But honestly, there were moments where vocals kind of had the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I just thought they were breathtaking. I just thought they were really, really good.
Yeah, I really like Minotaur as well, and it's interesting what you said about the sort of R&B sound, because the previous track is the cover of the Francesca, and if you listen to the original, her own version of Liability is, it's very 90s soul and R&B.
Is it? Right, okay.
It like conjures up memories of like TV shows like Moesha and The Fresh Prince and that kind of era of
Okay.
Music. So she's definitely brought that into her cover of Minotaur, and it's a really strange version, but something about it just kind of draws you in. There's part of it where there's this sort of soaring call of Minotaur that reminds me. I don't know if you heard the Tenacious D song Sasquatch.
Yeah.
When they're like singing Sasquatch, we know your legend's real.
Yeah.
All of it is sort of like that kind of cheesy way, which I really like. Just the whole part about the Minotaur lives in a maze. Minotaur lives in a maze. He chases his tail. He runs around in circles and in triangles and in squares. It's just bizarre.
Nice. Yeah, it's a bizarre song. You don't know what would be taking a Minotaur home with you, though. A fucking right goose. Because that's one of the things it says, doesn't it? That's what she sings, like, I'll find a home for you.
I'll find a home for you, Minotaur.
I just remember thinking, like, surely bull in a china shop, I mean, that phrase must come to mind. Like, I wouldn't be taking a Minotaur home with me, like.
Well, there's the film Dave Made a Maze, which is the bad guy in that is a Minotaur. It's like a guy, he's a procrastinator, and his girlfriend goes out to work, and when she comes back, he's like built himself a maze out of cardboard that he's somehow gone inside, and it's like a whole labyrinth of a world that he's built. It's like the TARDIS, like from the outside it looks quite small, but you go in and it's like a whole. It's a really weird film, but
that sounds like quite a good film, though.
It is quite good. There's a Minotaur roaming around, like all the art and effects is made out of cardboard and paper, so like the blood is like ribbons. It's really cool.
That sounds familiar, actually. Just that sounds familiar.
But yeah, so it's got nothing to do with this, but
no,
it's definitely worth.
Went off topic a wee bit.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I could talk about all of these songs and feel kind of bad that I'm missing some of them out, but we'll probably be here forever. But it's there's so much good stuff on here. It's just I think it's a successful project.
Yeah, definitely.
And definitely a really good way to discover a whole bunch of new artists and different avenues of Scottish music, I suppose, isn't it?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How did you rate it?
I've given it a 9. I think it's really good.
I've said an 8 or 9 for me. Definitely.
Awesome. Cool. It's worth mentioning that we're gonna interview Fiona Liddell in a couple of weeks' time, which means it'll be up in like 2 months' time. But we're gonna hopefully have a chat with Fiona about the album and her other projects and stuff. So that should be quite good. Cool. So that was Cover to Cover by Fiona Liddell and various other artists.
Finally feel alright. At last I enjoy your laugh. Lit before you left, during the calm before the storm. Your heart's with stress and feelings has a meaning. Don't just hit the gym. The way the door chases you still. He runs around in circles still.
It's not finished. It's finished.